Ever wish for a safe place to have conversations that need to be had? A place where you could say the things that need to be said? Well, welcome to Hope for Med.
This is Hope for Med, new day for Med, for us, by us, and just for us. This is Hope for Med, this is Hope for Med, new day for Med, for us, by us, and just for us. This is Hope for Med.
Welcome everyone back to the Hope for Med podcast. This is me, Dr. JB, and today's featured guest is Dr. Jessica Louie. She is a critical care pharmacist working in California. Welcome, Dr. Louie.
Thank you for having me today.
So let us start from the very beginning. When did you decide that you wanted to become a pharmacist?
That's a great question. I actually was looking into the pharmacy profession back in 9th grade of high school. I come from a family, a Chinese American family, and my parents really encouraged my sister and I to choose a profession early on in high school so we could research different universities that had that career path so that we were set up to go to grad school if we needed to from that university. And I found it in my guidance counselor's office, a pamphlet on pharmacy. My mom had read an article in a magazine about the profession, and it really fit well within my skill set and my interests. My sister actually was interested in going into the medical field and pursuing her doctorate in medicine, and that wasn't the path for me. And I found that pharmacy was a great option early on. And then I went into shadowing pharmacists in high school before deciding that that was for me.
So after completing your education in pharmacy, what happened next?
So when I was researching pharmacy, back then there was less schools available. I lived in Wisconsin, and I came out to University of Southern California here in Los Angeles for my undergraduate and then my pharmacy degree. And I graduated back in 2013 with my Doctor of Pharmacy. Then I pursued a 2-year residency. So residency in pharmacy is optional, but it was something that I really was interested in. And I matched at my #1 program at the University of Utah Healthcare System. And I completed my PGY1 in pharmacy practice and then my PGY2 in critical care. And then I came back to Los Angeles as an assistant professor.
What made you decide to choose critical care?
Yeah. So during pharmacy school, we have what's considered an intern pharmacist license. It's something that we get right away, and you work as an intern pharmacist during your 3 or 4 years in pharmacy school to get that knowledge and build up credits for hours to become licensed. So I actually worked at USC's private hospital. It's a tertiary quaternary hospital. It has a lot of ICU types of patients. And I was really interested when I went into residency initially. I was interested in critical care. I was interested in solid organ transplant and finally cystic fibrosis. So some pretty specialty types of fields, and then critical care, which is a little bit more broad. So my residency program at University of Utah had all 3 options to stay on as a specialist for PGY2 residency. And I realized, during my first couple of months in my first year that critical care and ICU was what I wanted to pursue. And then I stayed on for my 2nd year of training so that I got that experience.
Well, you left Utah and then moved straight to Cali?
Yeah, so I came back to Los Angeles, and there were some new schools of pharmacies opening up in California at the time, looking for critical care pharmacists who had a teaching and education type of interest. And I decided to pursue that and took a job as an assistant professor at West Coast University School of Pharmacy here in Los Angeles.
Awesome. And that's where you're currently still working?
Yes, I am now an associate professor at the School of Pharmacy, and it's been great educating the next generation of pharmacists.
How was that transition from books to real life? Was it what you expected?
I would say that in general, graduate school and residency, I think a lot of hands-on training is very important. So yes, you can do a lot of book studying, but I think the hands-on experience, either through intern pharmacist work, shadowing, residency, fellowships is really important and really where you grow a lot as a clinician.
And so because you did that shadowing before, you knew what to expect in your day-to-day in the ICU?
I would say I somewhat knew what to expect, but I think that when I look back on that experience and how I ended up burning out early on in my career, I realized that I didn't exactly know the day to day, and the reminder that healthcare is great and our healthcare system never closes. Hospitals are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and working within one means that your schedule is going to be very variable, including holidays, weekends, nights, all these different schedules. And when you're actually living that life, it can be very different than you thought it was going to be.
Tell me more about your burnout story.
Yeah. So I graduated in 2013 and I actually started burning out in 2014 at the end of my PGY2 in critical care and then early on in 2015 in my academia role. And at the time, I honestly didn't know it was burnout because no one in healthcare was really talking about it. People weren't really open about sharing their stories then. And during that time, I was basically spending more time in the hospital or at work than I was spending in my own home. I took a lot of work home with me as well. And I was really feeling frustrated, exhausted all the time. And, a lot of us cope with frustration or cope with stress in some way. Personally, I coped with it by shopping a lot. I'll get that quick dopamine hit of shopping for more clothing or home decor, and then it would fade, and then I would be on to the next dopamine hit and shopping again to try to cope with everything. And I realized, through some life events that life can be really short, and this is not really bringing me a lot of joy. I was living hundreds, thousands of miles away from a lot of family members and loved ones. And I decided, I needed a wake up call. So that's when I started realizing that, it could have turned into burnout. And what really saved me was finding the KonMari method, decluttering and simplifying my life.
Interesting. What is the KonMari method?
So the KonMari method, if anyone has heard of Marie Kondo, she has a couple books and her Netflix series, but basically it's about addressing physical clutter in your life. And I think that, clutter does play a role in our stress levels and, those levels that can turn into burnout. And that's what really helped me at the beginning stages because I had been accumulating a lot of physical clutter in my life by shopping and coping with my burnout. So I think that a lot of times we start with physical clutter because it's very rewarding when we let go of clothing that doesn't make us feel confident, or we surround ourselves with less distractions around our desk. But then it goes beyond that. So I like to think of 3 other types of clutter: the mental, emotional, and spiritual clutter in our lives, and really being able to apply simplifying to those areas. Basically, you can simplify your calendar and just keep going with how you simplify, how you address relationships, health, financial health, all those different types of things.
What would be an example of owning your time if you're working, say, in the hospital and your schedule keeps flip-flopping?
So I think that there's important to acknowledge that there are some things within our control and some things that are not. And sometimes that means that schedule we have in healthcare because there's different coverage and different team members that have different specialties. And yes, your schedule may not be within your control, but then the other hours of the day are. And that means that when we look at our calendars, we can decide what's bringing us joy that's on our calendar and what we might want to let go of or push back to a different season of our life when we do have a little bit more time to focus on that goal or that hobby, either for ourselves or for other members in our family. So I think that it's important that we own the time that we do have then in terms of how do you want to spend it? Do you want to spend it focusing on a fitness goal? Do you want to spend it focusing on relationships and family? Do you want to focus on financial health and diversifying income? It's very different for every person, but we get to decide that. And then we get to set up healthy boundaries to remove distractions that may be interfering with our time. So I think that in general, when we get through the end of our training, I spent 9 years training, and many in healthcare spend several years training to where they want to be. There is a realization that life doesn't look exactly how you thought it would. And yes, it's part of that transition phase. And yes, some of us transition very well. But in general, burnout is, much more likely to happen in transitions in our life, whether that is a career transition or life transition, housing or family wise. So I think that it did play a role. It didn't mean that I don't like ICU, I don't like critical care. It just means I can use my skill set in different ways to educate or spread joy in a different way.
So are you still working in the unit?
So I don't work I'm not employed by a hospital because I'm employed by the university, but my interest has evolved a little bit, and my focus is more on post ICU syndrome. So that recovery phase after you've been in the ICU for a prolonged time that we've experienced a lot over the last year, and how you're going to transition and recover over the next 3 to 12 months. So it technically is more transitions of care, ambulatory care type of work.
And when did that transition happen?
So that happened a few years ago in terms of, the time spent as an educator in the university and the time spent in a clinical setting varies each year depending on the workload and the team members. So I started transitioning a couple years ago.
Besides your day-to-day work in the hospital, what else are you doing?
Yeah. So when I realized that, I felt really alone during my burnout journey and my transition, I decided that it was important I start sharing my story more openly about what happened and how I started to recover and reset my burnout. So I had started blogging on different topics, and I decided, to start a podcast on burnout, which is called the Burnout Doctor Podcast, and a YouTube channel to share, how I went through burnout. So if anyone felt alone, if they're experiencing it, they can maybe turn to me for some tips or advice. And I also got certified in the KonMari method. So I went into people's homes and helped them with physical clutter, and then started helping them with the other 3 types of clutter after that. So basically, I created the Burnout Doctor Method that walks you through this simple 3-step process that you can apply to your own life, on your own or with the help of a coach.
Going back a little bit, one of the things that you mentioned that I think we should highlight is that your burnout story began when you were in your graduate training.
Yes.
And I think that's really an important point, because burnout starts early is one of the arguments that I've been making and Hope for Med's been making. And it does start with your health professional training. And it sounds like you had a lot on your plate.
I did. And I think that it's important that we realize it does start early, and it's not a negative part of the part of us or the training. I think it's important to realize that there were signs where maybe my mentors did say things to me and I brushed them off, and my mentors did see the fatigue and everything and saw that I was pushing myself really hard. But I think that, no matter what, unless there was a big intervention, I probably wouldn't have changed my approach at that time, because that was the person I was, right?
If we delve back into your story of burnout, I understand that it was the hours that you were working played a major role in it. Can you tell me a little bit more about what your day-to-day experience was like?
Yeah, so I think that, I was coming off my second year residency. I had put a lot of pressure on myself to fit a lot of things into my residency and training program to finish off that 9-year journey. So my hours were self-induced, I will say. So if anyone is listening is in the field or looking at programs, I always recommend my residency program to others. I think it was a great experience, but I would recommend not piling so much on your plate. So I had about 5 research projects that year, including a prospective study where I consented patients on that study. And I was just spending a lot of hours after, the typical ICU day from, 5, 6 a.m. to 3, 4 p.m., then staying at the hospital to gather data myself or send stuff to my statistician team or consent patients. Overall, looking back on it, I realized that, I love thinking outside the box and being really innovative and being curious to ask a lot of questions. But at the end of the day, I don't have to take on every single project myself. There is delegation, or there's, putting it off to when you have a little more time to focus on that. So that's what started in my residency. Then in academia, it was a new school of pharmacy. I took on a lot of roles as course coordinator right away. And the transition was very fast in that first month. So I was taking a lot of work home with me, and then also trying to publish all of these research projects I had from residency. And the timeline for publishing was much longer than my team anticipated. It was almost 3 years for all of those projects to get published. And it was just a lot of disappointment, right, in terms of that publishing and the politics behind publishing in major journals. So I think all that compounded. And then besides that, I was shopping, I was not seeing family, and all those things compound on one another to where you hit kind of rock bottom.
And how did you know you had hit rock bottom?
I think that, all of us probably show different signs. I like to say that usually when we start to have resentment in our life, you may be thinking you're going through burnout or hitting rock bottom. And a lot of times we take it on people that we love. So you start, I had a lot of anger and frustration at the time. I was taking it out on loved ones that were around me. There was a lot of boundaries being broken down. If you're a people pleaser or a perfectionist and you're saying yes to a lot of things. So I actually had an aunt that died very suddenly in the ICU. And that's kind of when I hit rock bottom after that, and blamed myself for a lot of that story, even though it wasn't necessarily truthful. So I think it was about 2 to 3 months after that event happened that I decided, okay, I need to get help. I definitely recommend people seek out the help that they need, whether that is from a licensed professional, mental health professional, or someone else. Start investing in yourself. So that's technically when I started looking at the physical clutter and then looking at other aspects of my life that I needed to simplify. I needed to start finding harmony of how work basically aligns into our life. I like to call it work-life alignment, work-life integration, so that we can remember that work is not our whole life. I think a lot of people in healthcare, including myself, tied my entire identity to my job title. I tied my entire identity to, status and that type of success in healthcare. And I didn't have an identity outside of being a critical care pharmacist or a professor. I think that it's important, if you feel that way, especially if you're a young adult or going through career transitions, that you step back and think about, how do you want to live your life as a human being, a human being first, and our identity is not tied to our job.
Oh, that's such a key point, because it's so true that so many of us are defined by what we do, not by who we are.
Exactly. And, when I was going through that transition, I found Simon Sinek. If anyone's heard of Simon Sinek, he's a wonderful author and the Start With Why type of philosophy. And that's something that really helped me as well in the transition of going back to basics of, why do I wake up in the morning? What is my why? What is my bigger purpose in life? And, I think a lot of us have gone through life and inherently kind of know some of that, but maybe have never written it down very clearly, where you can say it out loud and write it down each and every day and have this bigger purpose. And that was a good exercise for me to do as well in my transition.
Okay. Do you still engage in this exercise today?
Yes, definitely. So that's technically, my why statement is really helping people find this confidence, so joyful and intentional lives, because we all have unique skill sets to add to this world and bring meaning to this world. And, that's my why statement. And, the clarify step is technically my first step in the Burnout Doctor Method of really getting clear of what you want, how you want to spend your day to day. Because when we are really clear about that, then we can make decisions easier of when someone offers us a project or a job or something else happens in our life, we can weigh that decision against our why and our values and see if it aligns.
So when during your training do you think this whole stepping back and discovering your why could have been applied?
So I think the earlier the better. Looking back on my own journey, I think that it would have been important even before I went to graduate school, that pharmacy school experience, because looking back, I likely had burnout in pharmacy school as a student as well. Those really high levels of stress, chronic stress that led into burnout. And a lot of students, I think, also have at least some type of stress in their life. And I think clarifying that before you ever go into the career or as early as possible is important. And then checking in on it at each stage. Each stage in the training process, because many of us in healthcare go through a lot of different training processes, and thinking about why you want to do this and what is your end goal can really help you reverse engineer how you're going to get there. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that you may change your mind during the process, right? If you go through your why and your values and you change your mind that this isn't a good fit, I think it's important to realize that as early as possible, because unfortunately, if you go through the whole process and realize at the end, unfortunately, we do lose a lot of very well-trained healthcare professionals who realize that it's not a good fit or they'd like to do something else. And the earlier, the better.
I agree with you 100% with everything you just said. It's important to think about what your why is at every stage and be open to change if need be. If you go down one path or one specialty and you're like, I don't think I really like critical care, well, then be open to transition to something that you may like better. So that's extremely, extremely important. And it's good to know that you currently engage in that practice of reflecting on your why. Is this a daily practice for you, or how frequently do you sit back and reflect?
Yeah, honestly, it is a daily practice. I start that with my affirmations each morning. And if you don't do any affirmations, I think that it's important to consider doing it, just writing down one sentence each day that you're going to live by. And I write down my why, and then I write down about 8 affirmations each day. And those affirmations change throughout the year as, life changes. But it's bringing that positivity into our life and reminding us, why we're here and how we're making a difference.
And so currently, what does your day-to-day look like?
So right now, it's a little bit unusual because we are still in the virtual setting with the university as we transition back to potentially a different schedule in fall. But for the past year, I've worked from home and taught virtually for the university and the pharmacy students. So that was a transition for everyone, but I had previously been coaching virtually for burnout clients or simplifying clients. So it was a pretty easy transition for me, and it was wonderful to still be able to connect with people. And that's why I really like reaching beyond that classroom setting, because we can really reach, beyond the United States and even the world to share our stories and our advice. So that's usually my day-to-day is spent on, different meetings for the university, for different committees, for students. And then the teaching is done based on the schedule. Previously, early on in my business, I used to do a lot of coaching at evenings and on weekends. And some of that has transitioned now to do more keynote speaking virtually or do more online courses so people can take it at their own pace.
Mm-hmm. And so have you been able to incorporate programs focused on burnouts and work-life balance with the students you teach?
Yes, I have. So I bring that into the teaching environment, and then we have additional programming and workshops for students who are interested. I think that the tough part sometimes is for students to realize that they want to participate, because we can't force things on other people, just like we can't force someone to declutter or simplify their life. They need to be inspired to do it themselves. And sometimes in the early process, graduate school or residency training, you may not be interested in learning about it because you don't think it will happen to you. So there is a combination of being willing to invest in yourself and put in the time and effort to learn about these techniques. Because when you're not going through it, you may not be as interested.
But I do think having these conversations will help people reflect and think, oh, I kind of feel the way that Dr. Louie felt. Oh, I do have a lot on my plate and I am really stressed and maybe this isn't normal. Maybe this isn't okay.
Right. I definitely hope that people can learn from it. And that's why, your podcast is so impactful in terms of being able to share stories so that people can learn from, our experiences and maybe improve their own lives.
And one of the things that people find so difficult is this balance between their work life and their home life. And it seems like you've been really focusing on that area in your own personal life to make that a little bit better. So can you walk me through how you've done that?
Yes, definitely. So I like to think of it as work-life alignment. And I think that it's important to remember that work is not your whole life. And I like to call it the weekly joy check, where we check in 10 different pillars of our life. You can definitely come up with what pillars that work best for you. But I think about, if any one of these pillars feels misaligned, it can be really difficult to know where to focus our time and our energy on. So work is obviously one of the pillars, but the other 9 pillars I think about are health, our mental, emotional health, our family, our friends, our partner or love, our experiences, our learning, our spiritual health, and then our financial health. And I check in on each of those areas once a week, rate myself on how I feel in them, and then any areas that are getting a little bit lower in the ratings, I set a goal in them. So usually it's only 1 or 2 areas where we might feel misaligned in. For example, maybe you forgot to return a phone call from a friend from last week because you were at work or something. And this week you want to set a goal to make sure that you schedule time to catch up, either go out for coffee, catch up on the phone. And that could be something that you schedule in your calendar in the next couple of weeks. It could be as simple as that. It could be that you wanted to take on a new hobby, an experience or learning wise, and you wanted to schedule in some time for it. Over the past year, my partner and I have played tennis. So it's scheduling that time in our calendar and feeling really aligned in that area then. And, we're not going to schedule a goal in all 10 areas of that, but it's just making sure that we're realizing that it's not just work and personal life. There are multiple factors within each of our own lives, and finding joy in each of those areas in different ways, I think is really important.
And is this something that you engage with your partner, or is this an individual reflection?
Yeah, so I would do recommend starting individually doing that yourself. And then I actually do engage in a weekly, we call it our weekly marriage journal with my partner. And we ask each other 6 questions each week about, what has brought each other joy, if there's any conflict that has arisen, working through that from the previous week and thinking about how we can help each other in the upcoming week. So I do think that some people call it like a marriage check-in, or I've in the past called it like a simplify summit, but doing that weekly I think is really helpful. And, some people would prefer to maybe do it once a month, but it does help to be on the same page and then also plan on our calendars so they are in sync and we know food-wise, what's happening, work-wise, what are the hours, financial-wise, all those good things that are good to stay transparent on.
And so if you were to reflect back on when you first started and you're working in the critical care unit and bringing back work with you home, is there anything like now that you are using these various methods that you could have applied back then to people who still find themselves in the situation you used to be in?
Yes, definitely. I think that a lot of us, especially maybe like early on in your job, it can be really enticing to bring work home and work extra and say yes to a lot of things. And I think that one way we can do that is to address how we communicate with people and set up those healthy boundaries. I like to think of it as the mental clutter in our life. It's kind of like the digital clutter in our life. And I would basically, one way would be to teach other people how to communicate with me, right? So if we are bringing work home because there's a lot of emails to send, or you feel like you're on 24/7 because someone could page you or call you, it's a set of those healthy boundaries where you teach people, emails for non-emergencies. So you're going to get a response in 24 or 48 hours. Phone calls are for emergencies. So it should be a significant emergency for you to call me. Otherwise, it's teaching other people how to think critically, both team members or family members. And, text message might be for emergencies depending on the person. And I think this helps make sure that we don't feel attached to email inboxes all the time, pop-up and notifications all the time, and set up some of those boundaries. And then as a leader or as a team member, I think it's important to also realize that we can lead by example. So even if you are writing emails at night because you didn't get to them during the day, scheduling them to send during work hours can be really important so that other people don't feel like they need to respond to you right away. It's not urgent. And that can help take off the pressure of feeling on all the time.
Yeah, because feeling on all the time and not being able to separate yourself from your work and your home really will drive you to the highway to burnout.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, technology is great, but it does have some of those downsides. And I think that when we feel on all the time because of notifications or social media and things, it's time to reset how you want to own your time around those things. And yes, some people may not respond as positively as you would like them to when you start setting up those healthy communication boundaries. But overall, I've set those up over the last 5 years, and I've never had someone or a student say that they couldn't get a hold of me when they needed to.
I could see how a student may feel like they can't set up these healthy boundaries. Do you think it's possible for students to be able to do that when they're training?
I definitely think it's possible for them to set this up in terms of that means, when there's organizations or signups for health fairs and things, it's not a first come first basis. So people don't have to feel like they have to respond to an email right away. There's simple things that you can do around that. And then in terms of getting help, there's usually office hours or time to ask for additional resources so that you don't have to be attached to your email by any means all the time.
So if my listener wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do so?
Yeah, I would love to connect. And, honestly, the best place is the podcast or on YouTube, depending on what you like to watch. And then my website is my name, drjessicalouie.com. And happy to reach out if you would like to email me and get in touch and talk.
So, Dr. Louie, in closing, do you have any words of advice for my listener?
Yeah, so words of advice would be honestly take some time to reflect on that why, that value statement. You could set aside 15, 30 minutes, get into like a calm sanctuary place that you enjoy and just write it out with pen and paper. That's always what I recommend, pen and paper, old school, and just give yourself some time to reflect of what you want in your life so that you follow your dreams and not, your parents or society's dreams. They're your own dreams and it's going to be very individual to you. So invest some time in yourself and reflect.
Yeah. Who says a doc can't rap? DOCTORJB, the greatest doctor to ever touch the mic, the greatest podcast ever broadcasted or pre-recorded. Come learn some. Each one teach one. I'm done.